Hello and welcome to the Midnight Choir. Today I'm interviewing Philippe J Fournier, the editor-in-chief at 338 Canada, as well as a chronicler at L'Actualité Magazine, Politico Ottawa, and The Walrus. When I called Philippe, it was out of a deep curiosity to understand more comprehensively how polls work and whether they contribute to a democratic society. Philippe picked up the video call, and behind him I saw the office of a teacher. Considering the amount of time I was suspended or called into the office during high school, it gave me a flashback of passionate teachers telling me I wasn't living up to my potential. In his face, he had that same calmness, the passion of a man who has devoted his life to educating future generations in hope that we would see a better world tomorrow. I wasn't wrong either. Philippe spent an hour educating me in the efficacy of polls and how we could hope to have a free society in the future where democracy could flourish. His answers were always thought out, balanced, and given with the kindness of a scientist teacher who wanted nothing more than education to be the center of our society. I hope you enjoy this interview, and I hope you enjoy the work that we are doing at The Rover. Go check out therover.ca/support-us or therover.ca/newsletter. Go check it out, go subscribe for something, go subscribe for the newsletter, throw us some money. I think you'll really enjoy the reporting that we're doing. But for now, here is an interview with 338 Canada, Philippe J Fournier. Philippe, I wanted to discuss polling because in 2016 we saw some really anomalous stuff. Can you give a little rundown of what happened in 2016 with specifically the United States election?
Did we though?
Did we?
Did
okay,
we though?
You're going to educate us on that
absolutely,
if you can. I would love to be educated on that.
I've answered these questions many times, and I think it's important to remind readers and listeners that in the U.S. presidential election, Trump versus Clinton in 2016, the polls were really not that bad. The interpretation of polls, the poll analysis was awful. But it yielded one great thing about this, though, because this is when I decided to launch my website. I was following closely the Clinton-Trump election. I was not public yet. I'm a Cégep teacher. I was doing my thing in Cégep, but I was compiling all the polls on a very humble spreadsheet and realizing that what I was reading in the newspapers, what I was hearing on CNN and analysts saying, it would take a once-in-a-century event like for Trump to win. Like Clinton had this in a bag. The data did not say this. And so when I hear people, remember 2016? It's like, no. 2016, the polls were pretty good, actually. If we look at the national polls, there were some troubles with some states, but the national polls, I have it here. So Bloomberg had Clinton plus 3. YouGov had Clinton plus 4. Fox News, Clinton plus 4. ABC, Washington Post, Clinton plus 3. And it ended up Clinton plus 2.1. That is really precise. That is really good.
That's frankly right on.
Right
the
on.
The problem, I guess the analysis was wrong, partly because in the States, popular vote doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. It's by states. And also when, the saying, and it goes also for this election, Harris versus Trump, I get this question all the time that, so you have Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Right now, if the map stays the same, if Trump wins one of those 3, he probably wins the election.
Interesting.
So Mayor Harris has to win all 3. And so people says, well, if she has to win all 3, why are the odds about 50-50? It's because those events are correlated. Those 3 states have voted in a block in every presidential election since 1988, and that's not a coincidence. And so same thing in Canada. We have 338 electoral ridings. Those are elections that are separate from each other, but they're not independent events. It's not like throwing the dice where each dice throw doesn't care about the previous one.
Yeah.
So they're correlated events. And so that's why the interpretation of polls in 2016 was really bad by many people, but not everybody. But it's not, and also 2016 is 8 years ago.
It's a long time ago.
There have been many elections. If we focus on Canada, the polls have been really good for the past decade in almost every major election. So
really,
so it's like, sometimes the weatherman will say it's going to rain. You're going to go outside and it won't rain because there are probabilities. Sometimes the most likely outcome doesn't happen. It's rare that we have a sure thing, especially with elections, because we're not dealing with the weather, we're not dealing with electrons or galaxies, we're dealing with people, and
Right.
people can be strange
It's
sometimes.
very complex. Now, before we dive even further, Philippe, you're a pollster?
No!
I can't believe it. I was wrong. Philippe, what are you?
I'm a poll analyst. So,
Yes.
pollsters in this country, I focus mostly on Canada. I covered the French election, the US election, the presidential election, but mostly my focus is on Quebec and
Okay.
Canada. And I take the polls, I analyze them, I break them down, I compile them, and I created an algorithm to give probabilities of winner in election in every riding, and hence also what are the probabilities of the outcome of the election.
How
So
does your algorithm work?
that we could get into that, but just before, I mean, so
Okay.
so,
Sorry.
so difference between what I do in a pollster is like the pollster basically makes the wheat, and then I make the bread. So
Okay.
I cannot, my work cannot function if I don't have good polling. And
Right.
we are lucky in Canada. We have like about a dozen really good pollsters in this country, and
Highly rated ones.
yeah, exactly. That I get,
Hmm.
that I can trust, and I know they will have the occasional miss. Every good pollster has an occasional miss, but in the long run, they are mostly right, and so
Understood.
they have helped me look good on many elections.
Because your algorithm's just on point.
Well, I mean, also again, if I get into an election night, I'm always nervous on election night because I know what people will say if what I say is most likely to happen doesn't happen. I will be able to explain it most likely, but I will also look stupid on TV, and so there's also that thing that always makes me nervous. But what gives me sweats at night is not that the polls are wrong. If the polls are wrong, I can point to those polls like, well, look, they were wrong. And if the polls are right and then I'm wrong, that is the nightmare scenario for me. It hasn't happened yet, so let's knock on wood.
Yeah. 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 Now, Philippe, there's a lot of questions I think people have. The biggest one for me personally is I don't really fully understand how polls are conducted. So, how does a pollster, which is not you,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
does a pollster conduct a poll? How do they find the information? How do they get an accurate reading?
Well, if I can go back here to the basic of statistics, because
Mm.
I teach physics in Cégep, and physics, of course, is part of the natural science, and there is a philosophical discussion whether math is a science. Some say math is more of a language, but I can tell
Mm.
you for sure that statistics is a science. It's verifiable, it's testable, it's something that you can compare predictions to results, and so it is really a natural science. And so if
Okay.
let's say we'll play a little game, we have a little container with colored balls in there, right?
Mm.
Blue and green and red, and you pick them at random. Well, if there's like a third of the balls are red, a third of the balls are blue, and a third of the balls are green, you have one third of a chance of picking each color. If I tell you I'll pick 20, what are the odds that you pick 20 balls that are red? It's possible, but it's astronomically low, right?
Yeah.
And so this is about the basic of statistics is that when you have a random sample, your sample, the bigger it is, will look like the whole thing. Will look like, so you have a country of 40 million people. If you ask a random sample of about 1,000, you have a really good chance of being close to what the huge container is. Now,
Really?
oh
Even though
yeah,
it's only 1,000?
yeah, and that's statistics. It's basically also, casinos work on this, right? That's why
Yeah.
casinos make money, because it's just printing money, because they know the odds. If you have a 48% odds of winning, they have a 52 odds of winning, and in the long run, the probabilities will be right. And so that's why some people say, how can you say a poll of 1,000 people is accurate? It's like, well, that's the science of it. That's what it is. Now, the challenge for pollsters is that true randomness is impossible. We're not picking balls out of a bag. We are asking people who they're gonna vote for, and a lot of people first are hard to reach. And other people don't want to answer that question. And other people maybe will give you a, for lack of a better term, bullshit answer. Can we swear on this podcast? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah,
Who
okay.
cares?
But
Chris swears so much, man.
they will probably bullshit you. So you have to be very careful. And also, how do you reach those people? There was a few decades in our society, a few decades in history, where you could just pick up the phone, dial a number, and hello, my
Yeah.
name is so and so from this polling firm. Would like to ask you a
Yeah.
few questions. Um, there are still pollsters who do that, but it's harder and harder to reach a representative sample of the population for many reasons. How many times do you answer your phone when you don't know the number that's calling you for the first? I mean, I'm not that young and I don't do it. And we know that young people don't do that. They will not pick up the phone.
Yeah.
So the challenge for pollsters, and it's a constantly moving target. Polling requires you to reach people and to reach enough people that they are representative of the population, the voting population. So that's the challenge. And that's the basic of statistics.
How do these pollsters account for biases? So what if one demographic who's terminally online answers way more than other demographics?
Well, here's the thing is that so there are online posters and there are still to this day phone posters. There are also this, what we call IVR, interactive voice response, which is the automated calls. They will ask you for your age, where you live. Sometimes they'll ask you for your income or education. And so you can take this data and create a sample that is representative of the voting population, because we have that from the census. We use the Canadian census as a reference. So we know how many Quebecers, how many Anglophones, how many Francophones you got to have in a poll to be representative. So that's why Statistics Canada, the census, is so important. It helps scientists, not just pollsters in all kinds of fields, but including pollsters. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And as a polling aggregator, how do you weight your polls? Do you give more weight to some polls and less to other polls, or do you weight them all equally? You do. Okay.
Yes. So basically, and I don't want to get into the math too much. I know I've done it already because I know the people will disconnect. But a poll is as accurate, if it is random, it is as accurate as the square root of the sample size. So if you double the sample size, your accuracy increases by square root of 2. Okay, so a poll of 5,000 people and a poll of 1,000 people, both are good, but the 5,000 people, if it's done properly, should be more precise, or it should be closer to the pin. So I weigh polls with their sample size, their field dates. A poll that is getting old will have less and less weight as we go forward in time. And I give a rating to polling agencies in this country based on their past records. And so the higher the rating, the higher the weight. So, for example, the highest rated in Canada right now is Léger. Léger has been extremely accurate in the past decade. Federally, in provinces, they had a miss in 2018 in Quebec, but everybody missed 2018 in Quebec, so something happened there. When everybody misses, it means something. I'm sorry?
Was that when the CAQ won or the Bloc came back?
That was the first CAQ victory. The Liberals were overestimated in every poll, but we know why, because we studied it. We noticed that in all the ridings where Liberals usually do well, the turnout went down more than the average. So Liberal voters stayed home, basically. In general, and I do mean it really in general, because that's not true everybody, conservative voters really don't need a reason to go support their party.
They always vote. They're just more consistent.
They will show up. There's this saying in the States that Republicans, Democrats have to fall in love, but Republicans have to fall in line. So
that's really good.
So like the Democrats, why is Ms.
too.
Harris polling better than Biden, even though we know that the alternative in the States is Donald Trump? They don't want Trump. But if you don't motivate voters, if he just needs a few thousand votes here and there to just say, well, I'm going to vote. So you need to have a reason to vote for many people. So voters have to increase their enthusiasm.
It's interesting in the States because a lot of, if you're online, which I don't recommend doing that, don't be online.
Not too much.
It's not too much. Don't do it. But all these people are like online. All the Democrats are like, we're going to destroy him. And if you look at the polls, it's like a 1% difference between Trump and Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, guys, like, let's relax. It's going to be a very close race in the United States.
I mean, the numbers are changing right now. We see the momentum is squarely on one side, and that is justified. I mean, their enthusiasm right now is justified. And it's something that I tweeted last night. Of course, I got the usual reactions. But if you take the numbers right now, like just in the States, just freeze the number right now, right? And apply just a normal, acceptable polling error in favor of Trump wins.
Yeah.
And the polls don't have to be wrong right now. You just need a little fluctuation on the red side.
Because margins of error exist. There's always a margin of error of what? Right. How much is a general margin of error? 1-2%?
Thing is, it depends. If you have a random sample, it depends on the amount of the sample size. The reference is if you have 1,000 people, your margin of error will be plus or minus 3%, around the 50% mark.
And that changes based on increased sample sizes?
Yeah, if you increase the sample size, the margin of error decreases. If you're further away, I mean, the Green Party in Canada is polling at 4, 5, 6%. The margin of error was not 3% with them. It's lower than that because it follows a bell curve.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't want to go too much into math, but
right, you say you said that. Math interests the hell out of me.
I know, but it's beautiful. It's just that I don't want to lose the audience right now.
No, the audience will quit. They'll be like, okay, boys. To what extent do you think polls influence public opinion as opposed to just measuring it?
I love this question. Okay. I'm guessing that you asked me this question to go. Sorry, I'm going a little further here, but it leads to the inevitable. Well, should we ban polling during election periods, or should we reduce the amount, or should we?
I don't think that at all. But let's talk about it.
Because so information influences you, and guess what? Lack of information also influences you. Mm-hmm. Ignorant people are influenced by their ignorance, and people who are aware of stuff, that read the news, that read different sources of news, are influenced by their information. And so how are people influenced by polls? If polls are done properly, right, they are the most objective information you can get during a campaign. Nothing comes close. Like everything during a campaign is designed to influence you. Everything is designed to influence. There's there's rallies, there's opinion pieces, editorials. There will be shouting shows on radio and TV. Everything is designed to influence you. But the poll, if it's done properly again, will give you the score of the game. So you're watching a Habs game against the Bruins. And after 2 periods, the Bruins are leading 3-1. And a commentator says, well, okay, after 2 periods, the Bruins are leading 3-1. You imagine someone says, shh, don't say that. You'll influence the outcome. don't say that. It's like, I'll say it because that's what it is. Now, of course, if there's junk polling out there, that also can influence. But that's why I'm here, because I rate the pollsters, I comment on them. And if a poll comes out and it's crap, I will not hesitate to say it and explain why. So people sometimes, and also people don't understand, polls fluctuate. That's normal.
Yeah.
They have to fluctuate. I get the often question, why is this poll different? Like, can you imagine if all the polls said exactly the same thing? Wouldn't that be more suspicious to you? So about the influence, to go back, I'm sorry it's a long answer, but to go back to the influence, a poll is giving you the score of the game. And the score of the game matters a whole lot, because if you lose 3-1 after 2 periods, or you're ahead 3-1, your strategy should be different. It should be different. And party leaders, they get their internal polling. They will adjust their speeches, they will adjust their tone, they will adjust their itineraries during campaign according to polling. Why should this data not be available to the public? It should be. It's information. That's my answer.
That was the next question I was going to ask. How much do polls affect what leaders are saying, and is it something that works throughout the entirety of their leadership, or does it only work during election season?
Oh, well, it depends how big of a province or a state or a country we're talking. But and I know this will sound incredibly cynical. It's not. But let's say I'm the premier of Quebec. I will not make a major decision on any issue without polling. Well, just testing what do people think about this? How will they react? Even if I have to bring them bad news, news that will not be popular, or maybe a bill that will not be popular, I want to be able to gauge the reaction of the public beforehand, not to be surprised. This is smart politics. Those who don't do that, those who get surprised by public reaction, it's because they didn't test the field. You
Right.
should always, 1 2 1 2 testing. You test your mic, you test your microphone, you test your camera
Mm,
before going on the air. You should test how the population will react to what you do if you're in power.
that's really interesting. That's really interesting. I can you name an example of when a politician has not done that?
Um, well, let me give you an example where they did do that. I think
Okay.
it's easier. You
Okay.
may remember this early in the pandemic. Um, François Legault did his 1 p.m. Media hour every day, right?
Yes.
Early in the pandemic, just to
Yep.
reassure people. We didn't know what was going on. We had no vaccines. We had no
Most
idea what was
leaders were
going on.
doing it. Most leaders were doing it.
Yeah. And Easter was approaching. And as the government was saying, okay, these stores will close, this will close, this will close, school will close, they had to come up with a list of essential businesses that can remain open. And he said during a press conference, "Don't worry, kids. The Easter Bunny is an essential service." And he had a smile, and people laughed. Uh, and it was kind of sweet. It was kind of nice, right? Because the CAQ was polling every day on the perception of the premier, and they had data that showed that more and more people were seeing him as very cold, calculative, and not nice, not warm and
Mm,
friendly and fuzzy.
it's
And
not
he
his
threw
style.
that in there, and this is the kind of thing. It's very innocuous. It's very weird as an example, but this is the kind of thing that you do if you are perceived negatively on some light. You're gonna try to adjust. And I don't think I have an example of a politician that should have polled beforehand, but I'm sure there are many
Yeah.
that you should be able to gauge the reaction before.
Right. Can polls influence people actually going to vote
Yes,
versus discourage them? So
yes.
is it common? Do we see a large correlation between that or no?
The example we usually give when we answer this question is the Jack Layton NDP wave in 2011. That was mostly, well, it was many places, but mostly in Quebec. So the polls will kind of, I mean, the enthusiasm has to be there. But when the polls started showing, oh, the NDP is up in Quebec. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, wait a second, they're tied for first. Oh, wait a second, they're in first place. The data was correct. But I guess a lot of Quebecers were like, well, is the NDP really in first place? I like Jack Layton. Oh, you too? Oh, you too? So it probably increased the amplitude of the wave,
Oh,
but the wave was already there. It
yeah.
doesn't create out of thin air. Like to go back to Clinton and Trump, she had good polls in Michigan. It didn't help her. The polls were bad. So polls will not create enthusiasm if the enthusiasm is not already there. But the question is, okay, so let's say you're a
Yeah.
swing voter between the Liberals and the NDP,
Yeah.
and you live in the suburbs of Toronto. You go on my website, you see my projection. Let's say I'm just making numbers up here. You see conservative are 40, liberals at 38, NDPs at 11. If you still vote NDP after this, it probably is because you are really committed to the NDP and you don't really care for the liberals. But if you're a swing voter, seeing that may influence you, is like, you know what? I really don't want the conservatives to go in. Maybe I'll switch my vote. But the thing is,
Interesting.
if the numbers you see on the website, if they are close, if they are accurate, That's information. That's you making a decision based on information. The influence, you still have to decide for yourself what you do. You just have better information. If you're in a riding and you really don't want the Conservatives to win, and you don't know who you should vote for the NDP or the Liberals to block the Conservatives, if you don't have that information, you're just going blind.
So your argument is not necessarily that just polls are for democracy. You're saying information is what saves democracy.
Oh my
is what
God,
protects
yes.
democracy. Yeah.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
And many countries that ban polling, well, it turns out they're not democracies. So what a coincidence!
Right.
What a coincidence!
Yeah.
It's also not only that, but it's also free speech, right? I mean, telling pollsters you can't poll is like, what am I talking about? I can't poll. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah. I mean, in Canada, it's freedom of expression, right? So polls are necessary to have that freedom of expression because that allows people to voice their opinion before it's actually time to throw out the vote.
Yeah.
It allows people to say they're discontented with a leader. Like the polls right now, is it just all liberals are just like, I'm no longer ever voting liberal? Or are they saying what they're saying because they're mad at Trudeau? Like, that's a real question, right?
Yeah. At the federal level right now, we see a number of factors. I would be careful towards anybody who says they know the one reason why the Liberals are down on the polls. There are many factors. One of them,
many factors.
The Liberals have been in power for almost a decade.
And this happens every decade.
Every decade. Go back in time. Usually after a decade, Canadians get tired of government. They want new blood. And then the cycle goes again. So Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are really going against the tide if they want to have a fourth mandate. The polls don't look good. They have been in power for a long time. After a while, I mean, the Quebec Liberals did really well in this century, right? They won 4 elections, almost in a row. There was Pauline Marois in 2012, but they won 4 elections, including 3 majorities, and then they got crushed. They got crushed because they were fresh out of ideas. They ran out their time. It's okay to lose an election after being in power for so long. It's okay. It's just that, what do you do after that? I mean, I'm looking forward to see what the Liberals will do after they lose.
Me too.
We will tell who they are, basically.
Same with the NDP. I'm really curious to see what happens. They are out of debt now, which is really interesting, and they can make maybe changes in their leadership. I mean, I think most of us would love to see fresh blood in the NDP as well.
Well, I mean, it will be the 3rd election for Jagmeet Singh. I mean, his predecessor didn't have that luxury. That's true. If the NDP doesn't grow their deputation in the next election, they can ask, so why do we keep Jagmeet Singh there?
Yeah. I think we'll have to keep our eyes on the polls, honestly. I don't know what the polls are saying for NDP leadership, but I'd be curious to look at it. Do you have information about that?
I mean, we have favorability numbers. Abacus data often has positive impression, negative impressions. It's just that we judge leaders differently depending on if they have a chance to win. For the longest time, Jagmeet Singh, I mean, the polls, they showed he was the federal leader who was the most appreciated. But it did not translate it to voting intentions.
No,
why?
It didn't.
You know why? Because for many voters, they like Jagmeet Singh. He's not a threat to the status quo. So, we like him. He's all right.
Right.
If he became suddenly competitive to win, people would take a second look. It's like, okay, hang on here. So they judge people differently depending on how they are placing them. Yeah.
Are there demographics of people who participate more in polls? Do we know that?
Old people.
We
know that.
They also
Older voters
more.
Show up. Older voters show up. Thing is, we do not usually have exit polls in this country, and so the data on this is uncertain. But I know that Elections Canada has had some data. I don't have it in front of me, but they basically had studies just after a ballot, to see who voted, the genders, the ages, and so young people really need to be motivated. They need to really like a candidate and they don't feel the sense of civic pride as much as older people can feel.
Of course not. I mean, just look at, I remember being in university, and if I loved a class, I had an A, and if I didn't love a class, I had a C. you're driven so much by your passions when you're
Yep.
younger, and that's normal. That's
Yep.
just normal. And it's
Absolutely.
super fine. And it's frustrating sometimes when you're older and you're like, get out and vote, come on.
Yeah.
But like, you're young, it's all good.
But there's also studies on this. When you see the efforts of Elections Canada, I know Election Quebec did this. Like they invite parents to bring their kids to the
Oh,
voting booth,
that's
and they
cool.
have little boxes, and the kids can like cross a name and then put it in a box themselves, and
That's
it's
cool.
really cute. And of course, that's not a real ballot. We don't count those,
No, of course not.
but it's a force of habit because we have data on this. If you turn 18 and an election comes up and you go vote, you'll probably vote all your life. Whereas if you miss the first few elections and you feel disconnected, it may be harder to get you to a voting booth when you get older in life.
When now, since we agree that polling is so important to the safety of democracy, what sort of ethical considerations are there when polling?
Well, how to answer that? The thing is, okay, so there is a natural selection, a Darwinism that happens in the polling industry. Because if your polls are bad, you won't stay in business. There's a saying that Monsieur Léger, Jean-Marc Léger, said a few times. It was in his book, Le Code Québec, was really good. He said, "Politics is 1% of my revenues, but 99% of my problems." And the reason I do it is, when do you ever hear, like, you don't see ads for market research firms, you don't hear that, but you see that, oh, hang on, Léger nailed that last election. So if I have a company, orange juice, airlines, whatever it is, and I want to test the market for my product or my slogans or my advertising, before you put an ad there, you test it with a test audience to see if it's good, right? Um, you will go to the firm that can call the election on the nose. You won't go to the firm that missed by 10 points.
Yeah.
So bad pollsters can't stay in business, and that's why they usually go away. But when bad polls come out, I think this is now what I do. I won't say it's my duty, because I don't have a duty. I can do whatever I want, but I feel compelled now to for my own credibility, for my own work, to warn people. Okay, this poll came out, but please know that this pollsters really did well. Did not do well in the last election.
Mm.
They will not be happy with me saying that, but sometimes a pollster miss and they improve. They fix their samples, and next election they do well. So it's all good.
Okay, yeah. So are partisan pollsters trustworthy?
Well, I I don't mind that they have some. I mean, they have a stake in the game, or they have opinions that they
Mm.
express on social media. I think it's more honest for them to show their bias, their opinion bias, than to try to hide it. What matters to me is how good their numbers are. I mean, we know that there are posters. I mean, you follow probably a few posters on Twitter or the social media. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them have clear-cut opinions on stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think they should express those openly, but they have the freedom to do so. And I will judge them not on the opinions they express, but on how well they perform during an election. So I will not criticize them for what they say. I know I don't do it. I don't express much opinion on social media, because I think, since thing is, I judge posters basically, and I know they don't like it. But after an election, if a poster miss, or have a small miss, even, I will rate them. And so it's like, my students after an exam is like, "Why did you give me a B?" It's like they sometimes they wonder, and I always say it's the data. You just follow the data, nothing personal. It's not because of your opinions.
Yeah, you're looking at data.
Yeah, and thing is, I think, since when you're a pollster, you should, if you're hired by a party, for instance, that's fine. That's good business. You should I mean, getting to be a pollster for a large party in Canada, that's good business. You should take the opportunity. Don't hide it. And don't I mean, if you fudge your numbers, we will know it. Or at least I will expose you, and then you will lose business. So I don't have a problem per se, as long as the numbers are good.
Right, right. we live in a very polarized society. Does that affect polling numbers? Because people are more radicalized, they answer more in droves, or does it help with them potentially because people are more honest?
Well, that's a multi-layered question. I
Mm.
still see the voting public as a big bell curve, and the extreme of the bell curves maybe have gotten more extreme or more vocal, but is the whole bell curve tilting one way or another? I'm not too sure about that. It's cyclical. Um, so are people getting? I mean, in this country, are people more polarized, or are they just angry on the internet? I don't think these two things are the same.
Right.
Um, in a
The
polarized
internet is
election,
not a good gauge.
no, it really isn't. A polarized electorate may be more wary of the information that is thrown at them. Because if we take the example of social media, you publish a poll that has the conservatives a little higher than usual, and suddenly, well, you're a conservative sellout and you want to destroy Canada. Or if you publish a poll like this morning, there was the new Nanos update that has the liberals a little more, a little higher than what other pollsters have, and
Okay.
obviously he's a sellout, and that's we cannot stop at these people. These people are fringe. They will take bad news. They, instead of taking bad news, says, "Oh, okay, hang on, that's bad news. We should reflect on this." No, obviously the messenger is the problem. Screw these people. I've learned to immune myself from these comments.
Of course, you have to. I
You
mean, I've
have
seen
to.
people like rag on you on Twitter, and I'm like, he aggregates polls.
Yeah, and
What? Relax,
I've
y'all.
probably muted them a long time ago, and
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
do not care.
yeah,
What
yeah.
I care about, however, and I remember in my first years when I started this, I want to be able, after an election, to show up in class and see my students and tell them I was as honest as possible with the numbers. If there was a few mistakes here and there, it's because the data was wrong, or at least I learned something. Maybe I learned something and I will try to fix it. But because I remember November 2016 after the Clinton-Trump election. This is when I started QC125 because I saw in the media, in Quebec media, we had the same problem as in the States. We have journalists that are really good at what they do, but really don't understand math. And maybe they could use a hand. Maybe they could use a hand. And I remember shortly after, Alec Castonguay, formerly of L'Actualité, now he's at Radio-Canada. I mean, Alec Castonguay is a friend. He's really smart, good writer. I mean, I see him very highly, but he was really open to me. He says, I do not understand the math.
Fair
So
enough.
please, come at L'Actualité and help us, have a smarter conversation about polling numbers. And this is where I came in.
Are traditional polling methods going to stay relevant, or do you think they're gonna because they're already changing with digital technologies, right?
It's as I said earlier in the pod, it's a moving target. It's
Mm,
constantly moving. Polling has
yeah.
always changed. Like, this is not new, right? We just
Right.
have new methods. Phone polling is getting harder and harder, but the IVRs, the automated phone polling, may not be the future of polls. But for short questions, when you have like a questionnaire of like 4 or 5 questions, it's cheaper. It's faster. So you won't get on the phone with somebody that will talk to you for 20 minutes. It's going to be like 2 or 3 minutes. It's going to be automated, so everybody will have the same recording. You won't have a live agent that will have a tone or a timbre of voice that will irritate you or that we like more. So it's very efficient that way, but you cannot have complex questions, polling questions with IVR, because it's on the
Right.
phone. It's like, what are you talking about, NATO? So it's so there are limitations to every method. The online posters, they are doing really well in Canada right now. The online posters, like Léger and others, Ipsos, Abacus Data, their challenge is that their database, their panels, they have to maintain it. You can't just have, okay, I have like Leger, I have like 400,000 Canadians on my panel. I can pick from those. Every year people die. Every year people get over 18. And the demographics of this country changes. So you have to maintain it, and that it takes a huge infrastructure that not every company can have. You and I cannot start an internet panel to have online polls right away. It will take a huge infrastructure.
How do you think the public perceives polls? Do you think public trusts them or no? You would know best.
Well, okay. How do I answer this? Because there's, well, two things. The first thing, I don't care much if they don't trust it, as long as it's right. You don't have to trust the weatherman to go outside with an umbrella in case it rains.
Right.
But if somebody says, well, polls are just junk and they're never right, I will direct them to my website where I compare every election in the past decade.
Yeah.
The polls and the results. And you'll say, well, that's just a coincidence? No, this is people who study Canadians and that try to craft a good sample size to have something representative and have an unbiased questions for the questionnaire. So, it's a craft. It really is a craft. It's a science and an art. So if people don't trust it, okay, whatever.
There's nothing you can do about it.
Well, I don't know. I try to explain to people. I mean, again, I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for 20 years in Cégep. I think I have some pedagogical skills that others don't. I'm not saying I'm super great at it, but I have experience explaining complex stuff to people. And I try not to be I try also not to be a dick to people I don't know. Somebody will say, how can 1,000 people be enough for a country of 40 million? I could say, well, you're stupid. You never had statistics in college. Or I could say, well, that's actually very interesting. There's something to learn here because it's true. 40 million people or 1,000 people, how can you possibly? But that's like, if you go to the casino and you don't count cards, you will lose. Same reason, statistics.
Right. You're taking them in good faith. You're saying this because that's a fair question.
Usually,
you're assuming
sometimes.
It's good faith. Yeah, unless they're an assoul.
Well, if they're an asshole, I just don't answer.
That's it. Like if somebody's like, "You're dumb," like it's like, okay, well, why are you being weird? Like, there's no need to be like this. I don't have any more questions for you, but I'd love to hear, like how can we better educate our society to be interpreting these and aware of these things, because it sounds like your conclusion, and this makes sense, you're a Cégep teacher, so this shouldn't throw anyone off, but it seems that your view is less polls will save democracy, but education will save democracy. Yeah. and truly change how society moves. And so how can we better educate people on politics, on polling, on anything? Like, how can we do a better job of that? Because frankly, I feel like we might be doing a bad job.
Well, the thing is, what people do when they're alone at night in their computer browsing social media, I mean, we also have a sense of freedom. They can do that if they want to. Like, it's their thing. And trying to stop them would make the problem worse. It's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer, but I always try to give benefit of the doubt to people who ask me those questions that may sound weird at first. And again, try to not, when you write about polls or politics, don't think question. Like, say, okay, this poll says the Liberals are up. I wonder if the trend will continue. Don't say, the Liberals are up. Oh my God, momentum. There's a huge difference between taking the polls and then driving your narrative to it, then instead of just presenting what the current narrative is and then asking questions for the future. There are some commentators in media, not journalists, but commentators or columnists, that sometimes I think they're hurt by their certainty of what they say. I'm always doubting myself. I was like, oh, that's strange. Okay. Like if a poll is different from another, or if a trend starts changing, and I don't. My first reflex is not to say, well, clearly this is wrong. I don't know if it's wrong. I don't know. Maybe it is, but we'll know when we have more data. So be humble in front of knowledge. Just because when you think you know, we have, I know psychological studies have been published regarding it's harder for people to unlearn than it is to learn. When you think you know something, if you know this something all your life, and suddenly at adult life you realize, oh, it's not true. It's you may keep that belief to yourself and says, no, I think it's still true, and I keep it. I mean, when we look at the commentating we see on global warming, oh, what, the weather's changing? No, we have tons of data from NASA, especially from weather satellites. Oh, and suddenly, guess what? Insurance companies have noticed that natural disasters are on the rise because oceans are warmer, and so there's more evaporation, so there's more tornadoes and floods, and we have data. But there are people that just are convinced that they know, and they cannot unlearn this because they're programmed. So be humble in front of your own ignorance. I don't think I know anything, but I'm willing to discover it. I'm willing to study. This is what I try to teach my students.
That's a good way to walk away from polling, from data. When we look at science, when we look at data, be humble in front of it. Learn, accept that you might be wrong, and roll with the punches in the end, really, because that's reality, right? Like it's a good life lesson. It's a good life lesson. Philippe, I have no other questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we go?
I think that covers it. I know I talk a lot. I hope I didn't talk too fast. But I studied astrophysics, and there's so many things in the last 20 years that have changed. Just for example, Pluto's not a planet anymore. It was a planet when I started teaching. Right?
Yeah.
And there are people, I remember when that happened, people with their signs like, save Pluto. It's like, no, hang on. We discovered new bodies in the solar system that were very like Pluto in the same area. We created a new class of it. This is science in action. This is adapting to new knowledge. Same thing with the science of studying people and voters.
I think the thing people struggle with is the concept that science changes, but which is funny because it's not that science changes, it's that our understanding has grown, which is challenging for some people, right? You're like, but for example, I mean, let's say you're friends with someone for a long time. They're like, I have this opinion, I have this opinion, I have this opinion. And then one day they're like, yeah, I don't think I have that opinion anymore. It's shocking. It's very shocking. You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
But you've always had this opinion. And it's the same with science where it's like, no, but we have new data.
Yeah.
And the fundamental rule of science is it's probably true until you can disprove. If you cannot disprove it, it's true. Therefore, you always try to disprove it. You're always testing it. You're always questioning it. You're always putting it against the experiments, against the wall, right?
Two things that may seem contradictory here. First is with new knowledge, you change your opinion. With new data, you can it's okay to change your opinion. But second thing is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you tell me tomorrow, oh yeah, the Big Bang Theory, it turns out that's not true. You better have lots of evidence because we have tons of data on this. And so when you want to change the paradigm of something, you better get ready and just not be out of your, you know what. So I'll end on this, but that's a good life lesson. Just be humble and be nice.
Listen to the CEGEP teacher, everyone. Thank you. Be humble in the face of data, I think, is the most profound way to end a conversation. And I hope you walk away with that same attitude. I know I walked away from this a little bit smarter than I probably was in the beginning. With that, thank you so much for listening. You can check out our work at therover.ca/support-us or therover.ca/newsletter. Go sign up for that newsletter. Go check out the stuff we're working on and hit that subscribe and like button, please. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week.